Hello, Kanji. How is everybody doing this afternoon? Keeping warm, I hope. Well, do the best you can. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Hope you're all having a good time this afternoon at Kanji this year. My name is Dan, the Video Ninja, and I'm here to talk to y'all about video games. Where are my gamers at? Let's hear some sound offs in the chat. Some of you might remember we did this last year where I was speaking to you a little bit about indie video game alternatives to AAA titles. This year, I've got more of the same for you guys, but instead, we're going to be focusing a little bit more on indie alternatives to classic and nostalgic series that we all remember from 10, 20, 30 years ago. My goodness. Okay, so there's going to be some member berries in this, just so you guys are all aware. Some of the indie titles that we might go into while we go through this list here, you might recognize. Maybe you've played some of them or so, but I'm hoping there's at least one entry on this entire list that I'm about to go through that is fresh and new to everybody here. So, yeah. Make sure to, if you do see some stuff, whether it's the old games that you have the member berries for show up, or if something looks hype to you and everything, get in the chat, throw some hype down there. Streamers like me, we love seeing the chat explode and capitalization and emotes and exclamation marks and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I think we'll have some fun doing this. I'm going to try and keep things at a little bit of a brisk pace here, so I might stop for a breather and some water as well in between games and everything, and I'll have a look at the chat and whatnot, and I might see if I can answer a question or two here or there in between games. But what I think we might do is we might go in depth on certain questions, maybe at the end when we get to the end, depending on how much time we have at the end. It'll depend whether or not I get a little. I don't want to get derailed. is me point. So if you've got like suggestions for games that maybe I've missed on this list that you think may fit in somewhere here, throw them in there. Or you can always head over to the video games discussion channel on Kanji's Discord. I'm going to be keeping my eye on that as well if you want to keep the conversation going there. So, should have a lot of fun with this. Now I'm going to start every single one of these entries off with a little bit of a nostalgia pop for everybody by asking you all a question. How many of you guys remember this game? To kick things off, we're starting off with an old staple of arcade gaming, the 4-player side-scrolling beat-em-up. And with that in mind, there's probably not a better series I could think of as an example than the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle arcade games. What you're seeing on screen now specifically is Turtles in Time, which I think is the most popular and well-known entry in the series, though to be fair, any Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle game, with the exception of that weird NES game, would probably count since they all follow the same formula. And with good reason, too. The Turtles fit perfectly into the beat-em-up genre, which was all about, getting your crew together, picking your favorite turtle, and then just smashing the daylights out of waves of foot soldiers and mutant bad guys and everything like that. It wasn't a complicated genre back then, and it remains steadfast even today. Is everybody psyched for Shredder's revenge as I am? What was prevalent, though, was a sense of camaraderie that you had with your teammates when you played a game like this. You could team up on like particularly tough enemies, for example. Like two of you could get on either side of them and then just start wailing on them, getting around his shields. Or say one of your friends is like, needs a breather or is getting wailed on and needs to back off a little bit. You could run interference, So that had that real sort of team camaraderie when you played arcade like this. And in general, you just had a great time with your friends overcoming the odds in games like this. Well, there's an indie for that. This is Fullmetal Furies from developer Cellar Door Games, which some of you might recognize as the developer of the very popular roguelike series Rogue Legacy. It's another co-op beat 'em up game, Fullmetal Furies, that is, which is centered around 4 female protagonists known as the Furies, who band together to take on armies of souped-up monsters and baddies from Greek mythology. We're doing Greek mythology again, hence the Furies, I predict much yelling. This game has more hack and slash horde fighting, but instead of a team of just, palette swapped teenage mutants or what have you, you have 4 distinct characters, each with their own strategy and playstyle. You can tank up and play defensively with Triss, the blue Fury, who has the big tower shield. You can snipe enemies with Meg. She's the yellow Fury. She's got a sniper rifle and she can go prone. You can take on foes tactically with Erin, the green Fury. She's got like all the gadgets and short range weaponry and whatnot. So she's got drones and grenades and traps that she can throw down. Or if you're anything like me, you could just grab Alex, the red Fury, and just leap into the fray with a giant warhammer and start swinging away. The team has all these complementary skills that you'll need to face off against all the hordes that the game throws at you. And the hordes in this game are much more elaborate than just an army of goons in different colored pajamas. The enemies all come with the signature cellar doors style colored shields that will require each member of your current team to break. So, you know, characters with yellow shields, only Meg can break them and so on. So you really have to focus your team up. You have to coordinate and work together to beat each challenge. And the challenges in this game can ramp up to the point where you will really need a tight-knit team together to get through it. You also need to put your heads together with your fellow teammates when you play this game to not only, you know, get through the combat and everything, but there's also elements outside the combat that the game takes advantage of. There's some not at all simplistic riddles and ciphers hidden throughout the game's narratives that are sort of in your way of getting to like the really meaty part of the story near the tail end of it. So if you've got like puzzle solvers in your group or whatever that are keen to maybe try and figure those out, the game also has that. So all in all, it's that camaraderie that's definitely going to keep bringing you back to a game like this over and over and over again. It's also got RPG elements. It's got layering difficulty settings, all so much of that stuff that we all remember from the arcades. But, you know, there's a lot more of it packed into a game like this. What? Yeah. Next up, there's an indie for that. Oops, getting distracted. All right, next up. Who remembers this one? Oh, we're going back a ways now for this one. Good old Contra. I am old. It's a classic run-and-gun action game that gets your blood pumping. When it comes to 2D jump-and-shoot platformers and tough-as-nails difficulty, you really can't do much better than the original Contra games from the 80s and 90s. The controls were tight, the premise was simple, and the design was iconic, right? It encapsulated everything about 80s and 90s action and sci-fi blockbusters with then-current gaming technology, and the result was nothing short of a miracle. For those of us who played this series when we were much, much younger, it almost felt as close as you could get to piloting like the big muscle-bound action movie stars through like these cool sci-fi movie settings like Terminator or Aliens. And did I mention these games were hard? These were hard games. There were no punches being pulled when you played games like this. There was a whole subset of gamers who grew to love tackling meaty challenges, and they felt right at home playing games like this and dying and retrying over and over and over again. It complemented the really rough and tough action-heavy settings of the games when players were finally able to, you know, grit their teeth and power through all the way to the monstrous final boss and take them down, undoubtedly in a gigantic screen-shaking explosion. Well, there's an indie for that. So here is Val Ferris. More run-and-gun platforming action, refined pixel art that stays true to the tough, heavy metal sci-fi action and Geiger-esque biomechanical art style that Contra kind of was rocking a little bit of. It's meaner, it's bloodier, it's way tougher. And seriously, the level of detail in the art designs and the level of variety in this game will make you feel like you're getting like 20 original Contra games all packed into one. You're not just running to the right and blasting everything in your path in this game either. No, now you're managing different weaponry, and you've got like melee weapons, and you've got an energy shield or whatever, so you're blocking and parrying as well as running and gunning as well. And you're also maneuvering a lot more in this one. It's not mostly just, you know, a left and right horizontal blast or whatever. Now you're jumping all over the place. There's a lot of verticality introduced to it. You're looking for more weapons, more power-ups, other secrets, and so on. It's classic 2D jump-and-shoot formula, refined and polished into a violent, thrilling, single-player gaming experience. All the guns and explosions in this game, well, they all crack and pop with satisfying gravitas. The sound design in the game is epic. We'll get to the soundtrack, by the way. And the scale and design of the insane number of boss fights in this game will always leave you thirsty for your next big challenge ahead of you. Adding to the difficulty of the enemy encounters in this game, there's also a high risk-reward checkpoint system. You can collect items, these idols, throughout the game, and you can use them in one of 3 different ways depending on how you want to play the game, and it's very risk-reward. For example, you can set them at certain points throughout the level to set your own checkpoints, or you can hang on to the idols because the more idols that you have on you, the more health and the more energy for your big weapons that you can carry. Or a third way to do it is you can spend the idols to permanently upgrade your arsenal. So lots of different play styles in this one. So if you're more of a speed runner and whatnot, you don't think you need to worry about checkpoints, you can just blast your way all the way to the end, and that really amps up the tension when you don't have a checkpoint safety net to fall back on. Or if you just want to take a leisurely stroll through the game and just buff yourself up, and so that you've got like BFGs coming out of every orifice and just nuke everything in your way, and you can do that too. All of this craziness plus the swelling heavy metal soundtrack will take you right back to those fist-pumpingly awesome feelings of charging into the fray as you butcher entire armies into nothing more than pasta sauce and then stomp away looking for more. I don't want to play this game, but the graphics are cool. Yeah, it might be worth checking out a YouTube video or something just to see a playthrough of it, because if you want to see all the pretty graphics and, to listen to it, if you're of a certain fandom and you like games that sound a certain way, it'll do that for you. Okay, more member berries. Everybody ready? How many of you guys remember this one? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think it'd be hard for those of us who did play a lot of Diablo 2 back in the day to admit just how much of this game we played back in the day. I don't know about anybody else, but hours and days. By all accounts, this was the go-to MMORPG of the early 2000s, and it remained so right up until Blizzard put out a little game called World of Warcraft 3 or 4 years later, and then everybody stopped playing it. But regardless, this was the one that you and your friends could all spend hours playing, partying up and running through endless armies of demons and monsters, all while keeping an eye out for epic loot and sculpting your perfect character build. And you can have so many characters built and waiting on the bench to jump in and help you tackle whatever quest or task or whatever thing your friends had for you, and mastering all the classes in this game and getting all that epic gear and all the gear sets, was kind of the motivation that a lot of us had to just keep trucking through this game over and over and doing runs over and over and over again and starting up fresh characters over and over again, especially when we had different teammates join us. If you wanted to see what kind of party synergy you could put together, one person grabs a tank, one person grabs like a long-range spellcaster, for example, or something. Well, there's an indie for that too. This is Children of Morta, and it's a 2-player dungeon crawling roguelike, much like the Diablo games of old, in which you take control of an entire family of adventurers tasked with protecting their home and the whole world, in fact, from this evil god or something. You pretty much know the story. You can think of the family, kind of the family Madrigals, but if they were stock RPG classes, so like the dad is like a sword and shield tanky sort of character, where the oldest daughter is more of a wispy bow and arrow ranged fighter. The youngest son is really good with knives and can zip around or whatever, and like the youngest daughter in this, which is hilarious, is like a fire mage prodigy. So it's cool that it's all in the same family. It's a family of adventurers. Gameplay wise, though, you're basically just, you're running through procedurally generated dungeons over and over again and returning to the mansion every single time you finish a run for a lot of cutscenes. And the cutscenes and story of this game are a lot more robust than we used to get back in those old MMORPGs. It's told in like this wonderful pixel art format, and it's probably the biggest selling point, like I said, of the game. Aside from like the great evil that all the adventuring is meant to defeat or whatever, there's small moments of like family drama that play out during certain scenes when you go back to the town. Like, for example, there's a character that you don't have unlocked initially that in the story is like a character that ran away, or that character that left the family. A Bruno, for example, to remain topical. And that character comes back at some point, and then you unlock them and you can play as that character. So, you know, it's one thing to just want to do runs after runs after runs, but what'll keep you sort of invested in these characters is the story and how their family drama plays out alongside every single time you play through the action parts of it. And it'll also incentivize you to try out every single one of the characters too, not just stick with one character, because there's a neat little RPG tie-in to that story element in that all the characters have their own individual skill trees and their own, you know, level up system. But all the characters, as you level them up, will also gain passive skills that benefit the whole family. So, you know, if you level up the dad character, for example, everybody gets better defense the more he levels up. If you level up like the oldest daughter, everybody gets more dexterity. If you level up the little girl who's the fire mage, everybody gets like fire mage resistance or something to that effect. So there's an incentive there to not just stick with one pair and instead to play out everybody's story along the way through this game. It's a richer and more detailed take on the multiplayer loot-based RPG with its own charming aesthetic that makes for a great gaming journey to share with a friend. And excuse me, frog in my throat. Just recently, actually, within like the last week or so, I believe this game just got online co-op. So for those of us all still locked in or, you know, snowed in or whatever, it is a game that does support online co-op if that is your bag. Is it single player? What platform? You can play it single player. It is available on... I know it's on Steam. You can take most of these games that I'm talking about as being available on Steam because that's the primary platform I go on or I play on. Somebody else might have to jump in and chime in and clarify whether or not they're available on other platforms like the Switch or whatever. Tis awesome. Okay, how many of you guys remember this next one? Bomberman. For more of a arcade-like multiplayer experience, there's games like Bomberman, where friends could huddle around the screen and spend round after round bombing their way towards each other in an effort to outmaneuver and eventually trap and detonate each other in wild, chaotic fun. This series would eventually have single-player adventures splinter off from it, but at its core, Bomberman was, through multiple revisions and remakes, always just about securing power-ups and gaining board control over the shared territory that everybody was competing for. And while trapping an opponent behind a bomb and watching as they sit helplessly and wait for the inevitable was always good fun, there was also the added chaos of making sure you didn't get caught in your own explosions, which kind of gave the game its own unique little bit of charm. It made the game into quite a test of dexterity and situational awareness, as you always had to keep an eye out for not only what you were doing, but also what your bombs are doing, and what everybody else is doing, and what everybody else's bombs are doing. Well, if you take all that and mix it together, believe it or not, there's an indie game that kind of captures all of that. This is Invisiguns Reloaded. In Invisiguns Reloaded, you've got another single screen territory to battle over with up to 3 players alongside you. But instead of bombs, you all now have just blasters. But that doesn't mean that you're any more safe, because the game's big gameplay hook is that, much like the title would imply, all the characters are invisible, and they can only be seen in glimpses here and there. This recreates that familiar Bomberman sense that you need to be aware of everything around you as you play, because losing track of where you are on the map is likely to get you in just as much trouble as losing track of where all the other players are. If you step too far in one direction, for example, and you bump into a wall, that'll give away your position. If you fire your blaster, that gives away your position. So you can't just go trigger happy in a game like this. You gotta think and play smart, you know? If you charge ahead into uneven terrain or, like, say, grass or water, for example, your footsteps will give you away. So you got to be really careful and got to be on the ball in order to play a game like this. And luckily, there's power-ups on the map, like any other game there would be, to sort of help you along. In fact, Unlike Bomberman, this game also has some unique things in that all the characters have individual skills that are specific to themselves as well. They're not just, palette swapped of the same characters. So you have certain characters that can, jump over obstacles or dash around, or they can set teleporters or fire out like drones that allow them to see things that the other players can't see. So knowing what powers that you have and what powers your other players have just feeds into more of that needing to know everything about the battlefield awareness that you really need to master in order to secure wins in a game like this. Man, Pans, this looks like my nightmare. Oh, yeah. Yep. One more bonus thing that I forgot to mention about this game, for those of you who stream games a lot, is that it also comes with a function to launch a second instance of itself that shows where all the player characters are for you to send out to your stream. So if you want to engage your audience a little bit and give your audience the opportunity to know where everything is while the players still have to operate under the invisible rules, there's that option as well. It makes for really good streams sometimes because some people watching you can know exactly what's happening and know just how close you were to running into each other or how close your shots were to, going past each other, even though you as a player won't actually know. So good stuff. Good to check out. Ready for more member berries? How about this one? Who remembers Gauntlet? Back to the arcade again for another legendary multiplayer title. Gauntlet was the first big 4-player dungeon crawler that brought so many arcade party members together. It was a perfect marriage of two popular gaming subsets that were both exploding in popularity during the mid-'80s. Dungeons & Dragons and multiplayer arcade cabinets. The result was something that had all the battles and monsters and treasure of the former, with the streamlined, admittedly quarter-munching mania of the latter. Beat-em-ups might have had you endlessly punching goons over and over, or ninjas over and over, or whatever it was, and constantly moving to the right of the screen over and over. But Gauntlet had you exploring mazes and working as a team to decimate whole armies while you hunted for secret potions and valuable keys in order to progress. And let's not forget all the food that your team needed to survive, assuming you didn't have that one friend on your team that always destroyed it before you could get to it. Even if you did end up starving, though, this dungeon roaming classic gave groups of friends the chance to suit up as warriors, wizards, elves, valkyries, and take the fight to the hordes again and again. And what everybody came away from it all the time was stories of glory or failure or glorious failure. Either way, a lot of fun. Well, there's an indie for that too. So what if you took the wizard class from Gauntlet and just made all the playable characters into different flavors of that? Then you could just drop the charade of all the axes and arrows that your warriors and elves were constantly shooting being anything but just a stream of projectiles, and instead having everyone throwing actual magical projectiles and lasers and fireballs and all that fun stuff that wizards get. 9 Parchments gives you the same team-up sense of dueling with monstrous hordes and battling through twisting labyrinths. Each run through the gorgeous-looking levels grants a random assortment of spells to each mage as they progress, and coordinating with your teammates is the only way they're going to be equipped to tackle the ever-escalating challenges. One cool thing that you can do in this game is you can sort of pull a reverse Ghostbusters, and you can cross the streams and power them up. So say, for example, your one friend has like fire magic or whatever, and they can shoot fire lasers, and you've been investing more in, say, lightning magic, and you've got like a big lightning laser beam. Well, guess what? You can cross those streams and turn it into a fire lightning laser. It's pretty rad. The game also has super, super slick and super easy online co-op. Like, it's drop in and drop out with no fuss, no muss. You could be like, your teammates could be 3 hours into a run and you could just press a button and drop right in with them. I've never seen it so streamlined of a co-op experience. And if one of your teammates has to duck out or whatever, they just push a button and they're out and nothing stops. So it gives you that, brings back that arcade experience, where people can just step up, put a quarter in, and just jump in right there with you. And there's a lot of stuff in this game to explore. There's lots of secrets to collect and whatnot. You're doing runs and runs over again. There's all kinds of cosmetic collectibles that you can get for all the wizards, different hats, different cloaks and outfits, different staves and whatnot. So lots and lots of things to keep you coming back to this game. And it's a very, very pretty game to look at, too. All the atmosphere, all the terrain and whatnot is very gorgeously rendered. So there's a lot of good stuff to look at and a lot to keep you coming back to a game like this over and over and over. It does look pretty. Yes, it's very pretty. Wouldn't be surprised at all if there were some like cosplayer groups that got a hold of like the asset arts of all the little wizards that you could play in this game and put together a group, you know? Is couch co-op available? I believe so, yes. Couch co-op and online. I believe you can mix them both. I don't know if it's cross-platform. Somebody would have to oracle that for me, but yep. More member berries. You ready? I got a weird one for you this time. Who here remembers Minesweeper? Bet you didn't see this one coming, did you? I'll bet that each of us can think of someone we've met in our lives that was that one person that was really, really into Minesweeper, you know? Perhaps an older relative, maybe, who never connected with Mario or Zelda, but was like unstoppable in games like Tetris or this, for example. Minesweeper was a simple logic puzzle game that just about everybody at least tried once or twice, simply because, like its playing card cousin Solitaire, it came packaged as one of the default games on every computer that was running Windows throughout the 90s. Even if you only tried it once and never touched it again, you always knew that it was sitting there, waiting for you to take another shot. But then there were those who did play it more than once and got good at it. So good that, you know, watching them play it was akin to seeing somebody conjure up a spell or something. The way they just knew which squares were safe and which ones hit a game-ending trap in it. It was bizarre. For those players, eventually blitzing through even the expert-level tile sets became their own little 5-minute moments of zen, as the logic parts of their brains just took over and carried them to victory. Well, there's an indie for that. This is Demon Crawl. Okay, so the title may not bring to mind the kind of game that follows in the footsteps of something like Minesweeper, but that's exactly what this game is. It's Minesweeper, but at the same time, it's actually a little bit more than that. Instead of ending your game as soon as you make your first and only mistake, Demon Crawl instead takes the core gameplay of Minesweeper and makes it into the basis of more of like a roguelike RPG. You're still clearing safe tiles based on the numbers that surround them and marking unsafe tiles the same way you would in classic Minesweeper. But along the way, you can collect coins and gems and spend them on items and power-ups that might make your whole endeavor a little bit easier. You know, you might find a bomb that you can set and blow away a whole bunch of tiles without even having to think of it. Or you might get a shield upgrade or something that'll prevent you from getting like a game over if you happen to make a mistake. But the game also has new tricks to throw at you as well. So besides, you know, the increasing challenge of bigger and bigger tile sets, you might get hampered with things like distractions, time restrictions, other kinds of penalties as well. It takes the mechanical logic used to play the core game and spices it up with more lively graphics, sound, and, you know, other mechanics, gameplay mechanics. If you've never been able to get one of your elders who plays dozens and wins dozens and dozens of games of rounds of Minesweeper into any other kind of gaming, this might be a way to sort of ease them into something familiar, but with a few more fun and challenging new twists. Unpopular opinion, Sudoku is boring. I wouldn't be surprised at all if somebody takes the Sudoku, or, hey, maybe even something like Wordle and gives it this kind of treatment down the line, you know? Could happen. You never know. Downloading this game to my tablet right now. Yes. Mission accomplished. That's what I want to hear. I love it. I love it when people discover new games because of something that I told them. I love that. All right, more member berries. Now, this next one, I don't know. Some of you might. We're reaching for a really niche subset of old school PC gamers on this one. Those who perhaps were less inclined towards the action and spectacle heavy flair of most video games of the time, and instead gravitated towards games that maybe reminded them a little more of their literary fandoms. Deathgate was a series of popular fantasy novels that were made into video games that played out more or less like a fantasy novel. They were often considered the greatest games that you will ever read. What these games could take advantage of was not only the graphical and auditory faculties that the video game medium rather could offer, even as primitive and rudimentary as they were back when these games were developed, but also introducing a non-linear aspect to the storytelling by letting the player dictate which dialogue or interactions happened in what order. Likewise, the often heavy reliance on inventory management also meant that players needed to, in a sense, help the story progress by activating certain plot points by pairing them with items or information that the barriers were there to sort of impede you. This made games like this into more of like a detective story that the player could fill a very small but central role in solving. The story being told might have been long and sprawling, but it could potentially go as quickly or as leisurely as the player meant it to. In these cases, it was really up to the reader, or the player in this case, to bring the story to life. Well, there's an indie for that too. This is Disco Elysium. Some of you, I think, have heard this one. Here's a story where you have no choice but to step into the shoes of a character who can take a hold of the pace of the story and advance it from the burned-out oblivion that they begin in. The main character of this story emerges from a blackout stupor with no name that they can remember, very little clothing, and a murder mystery that they apparently are supposed to solve. What a way to start a game, am I right? From there, the player and their nameless character will need to figure out what the hell's going on by reading a lot. As the game is presented as a murder mystery, obviously you'll need to speak with everybody around you and find out clues to the crime at the center of the story, as well as speaking to the several dozen other looking into the several other subsequent stories happening alongside it. But the game doesn't stop there. You'll also have like nearly 50 voices in your head that represent every facet of your amnesiac character's personality to converse with, ensuring that you'll always have hours and hours of conversation to go through. And just because there's a lot to read, that doesn't mean that the game sacrifices quality for quantity. Many of the stories that you will dip in and out of brush up against some deep themes and ideas that are very thoroughly explored by everybody involved. The game also has a little bit of gameplay involved in the form of skill checks that are sometimes thrown at you here and there to allow you for some role play, because at the beginning of the game you do sort of craft your character's personality based on a limited pool of points that you put into either whether they're smart, whether they're strong, etc. And so there is some role play based on how you've built and sculpted your brand new hangdog detective character. But for the most part, even those skill checks, when they crop up and you fail them, for example, that doesn't, end the story. It just takes the story in a different direction. So there's always lots and lots of story, no matter what happens to you in this game, to get through. So there are games for those who like pressing all the right buttons in a short period of time, and there are games that amount to digital page turners, and I think this one is kind of the latter. For those more partial to a wordier experience, this is a game with hundreds of stories to tell. And yes, it is now fully voiced. If you're not the strongest reader or whatever, this game did come out a few years ago, and since then, though, they've added an update where all the dialogue in it, and there is hours of it, is now fully voiced. More member berries? Going back to one of my favorites now. How many of you guys remember Secret of Mana? Back when Square Enix was just Square Soft, They made their mark on the console gaming market by bringing everyone the now infamous Final Fantasy series on the Nintendo consoles. But they had other series as well, and the Mana series that I think only ever saw the light of day over here in North America as this one title on the Super Nintendo, Secret of Mana, was a little bit of a departure from like the turn-based RPGs that us Westerners were more used to seeing from stuff like Final Fantasy or even like the Dragon Warrior games, which were brought over and changed from the Dragon Quest games from Japan. So in presenting something like this, though, we were presented with something that was more like the first example of a hybrid action RPG genre, I think. The game really had the best of both worlds, I think, combining the numbers and character stats from games like those old RPGs that we all played, even on the computer. But it also had a system of reflexive battles and top-down dungeon crawling adventure mixed in with it, kind of like what you saw in games like Legend of Zelda, for example. The older Legend of Zeldas, that was. Players could, like, for example, go to towns and shops for equipment. They could stay at inns to regain their HP and their magic powers. They could talk to NPCs, all that good, stuff that we all got out of those Final Fantasy games back in the day. But you also would go out into the wilderness and all the monsters would be there. You'd see them and you'd have to dodge around them. You'd have to use your reflexes to fight them. It wasn't a case of wandering through an empty hallway and all of a sudden a different screen popping up and then suddenly monsters being there. So it was a little bit of a change of pace, I think. The jarring disconnect between the battle and exploration that came from that screen that used to pop up wasn't in a game like this. So you had to rely, like I said, a little bit more on quick decisions and reflexes more than just picking choices out of a menu. Not to say there was anything wrong with that, but it was just very different. The game also had a lot of color and detail in the art and animation, which it kind of needed because everything was happening in real time again. The dialogue might have still all been written out, but a lot more of the game's story and agency could be told through how the characters moved around in the world and how the world moved around them. Well, there's an indie for that. Crosscode. Crosscode introduces us to the Cross World, a futuristic MMO RPG that everybody in the world plays. Think of the Oasis from Ready Player One, or if you'd rather, Free City, for example. We have our protagonist here, Leah, the blue-haired character, who initially can't speak in the game, nor can she seem to leave this virtual reality at all. She's stuck in it, and that's how the game starts off. And in learning what secrets wait for her in the Cross World and beyond forms the kind of backbone upon which sits a retro-seeming, but in fact far more robust action RPG. In a game like this, gameplay is once again, speaking in towns with merchants and NPCs and traveling through hostile terrain. But all the conversations have been given, or all the conventions rather, have been given 20 or so years of tune-ups and polish to make the core gameplay feel smoother than anything with this kind of old school presentation has ever felt. The combat is a fluid mix of close-up mob brawls and ranged accuracy contests, and exploration involves traversing winding multi-dimensional mazes and time-based puzzles. Talking with NPCs and merchants is also streamlined, just like the combat and the exploration is. They all have like a classic old school MMORPG side questing with little exclamation marks over their head and whatnot. And the shops, oh my god, can I take a moment about the shops in this game? The shops have a cart-based system, meaning that you don't have to individually buy every single thing that you want to buy from an item shop or a weapon shop. Or if you're trying to sell 6,000 pieces of worthless armor, you can just load it all into a cart, press one button, and it's sold. Why don't more RPGs have this? Sorry, tangent over. Earnest treasure hunters and completionists will be glad to discover that this game also has a sprawling adventure that will take you quite a few different places, all beautifully rendered and wonderfully old school crunchy pixel art. And it's going to take you a long time to get through this game. There's a lot of game in this game. There's also a lot of accessibility options for this game as well. It's very approachable for people who are maybe looking at the screenshots right now and thinking to themselves, that might be a bit much. The game has difficulty sliders. It has accessibility options for turning down like the time limit for certain timed puzzles, or, the challenge amount for certain reflex puzzles, or even like how much damage the enemies deal to you. So very accessible. You never used to see that in RPGs. The RPG that you got was what you got. So definitely something to also hype up about this game for sure. Next panel, mechanisms and modes. Why does everyone do this? Why doesn't everyone do this? Yes, it will start off with that cart-based shop system, and that'll be it. I'll just rant about that for an entire hour. Would you listen? Okay, it'd be good. More member berries. I got a feeling a lot of you are going to pop off over this next one. Who here remembers Goldeneye? Here it is. The granddaddy of all console multiplayer deathmatch first-person shooters. Before Halo, hell, before Counter-Strike, there was Goldeneye 007. It might have been the brawlers and the one-on-one fighting games that got everybody huddled around the cabinets in the arcades. But it was games like this that made sleepover nights with your friends all surrounding the TV and the N64 so memorable. Technology at the time made playing a 4-player game in GoldenEye kind of a unique experience. Everybody had to share the same screen, right? And you only had like 1/4 of the screen of it to yourself. And let's be honest here, the screens back then weren't as big as they are these days. That's for sure. That meant that if you and your pals were all going to play honorably and swear a gentleman's oath to keep your eyes on your own quadrant, you couldn't help but every now and then notice that your peripheral vision was always there, and it always kind of meant that you at least had some idea of where your foes were and what they were up to, right? It was that ever-present but vague situational awareness that often turned the tide in most matches one way or another. Those who learned to hone their skills in recognizing the small clues they could glean from quick glances across the screen were often the ones that tasted victory the most in a game like GoldenEye. Well, there's an indie for that too. This is Screencheat. Screencheat is just the multiplayer from GoldenEye, and indeed every other same-screen multiplayer deathmatch game that came after it, from Perfect Dark to Halo. It doesn't have any iconic characters at the center of it. In fact, it doesn't have any characters at all, really, because much like that Invisigun's Reloaded game that we were just talking about, the main conceit of Screencheat is that all the player characters are invisible all the time. So in order to properly hunt down your fellow players, or to even know where they are, you'll have to do what the title of the game implies, and Screencheat. All the maps are color-coordinated and designed in a way to make it very easy to know, just by stealing a glance across the screen, where your opponents are. From there, it's the usual, spray and pray panic gunplay that I think we all remember from trying to aim with an N64 controller. That all ensues as you try desperately to hit your target before you lose track of them again. Complementing the hilarious frenzy of the hunt in a game like this is a hilariously ridiculous arsenal to go along with it. You get things like blunderbusts and rocking horses and exploding teddy bears. They may not be the sniper rifles and machine guns that you're used to, but they fit right in with the playful funhouse sort of setting that the bulk of this game's maps sort of call to mind, Best of all, though, even if there's something like schedules or distance or something else that's keeping us all apart and keeping you and your friends from piling on the same couch for some matches of this, worry not, because the game supports online multiplayer, up to 8 players even. And you might think that online multiplayer, well, doesn't that break the game's mechanics? No, it doesn't, because even in online multiplayer, you can still see everybody's screen. It's kind of an ingenious way to do it. So you can cheat away all you want in a game like this, even if you're playing online. It's like online laser tag. I'd be so bad at this. That's what probably would make it hilarious. Always so fun. More member berries. You guys ready? How many of you remember this one? Oh yeah. Another FPS. Yes, but kind of a different flavor this time. This is Left 4 Dead 2, the definitive zombie horde shooter that you had to have a team with you in order to survive. Preferably a team of other players, too, because playing with bots... but when you had that team, there was nothing better than blasting your way through the zombie hordes, Or if you were deciding to be a little brave and turning up the difficulty, getting through each one of the runs in this just by the grit on your teeth, The game had, much like those previous games we were talking about, that baked-in camaraderie, which is what a game like this is built on top of. You had to stick together and coordinate, right? You could try to play this game by yourself, but if you get knocked down, your only hope is that your teammates are able to make it to you and pull you back up on your feet. And the monsters in this, the zombies or whatever they were numerous and came in all shapes and sizes, many of which were very proficient at knocking you right back down again. That's why it was always best to have a plan and stick to that plan until the plan inevitably falls apart because it's a hoarder shooter, and simply by being such, your plan is sure to inevitably be overwhelmed to the point that everyone will just scramble to improvise in order to make it out of this game alive. Well, there's an indie for that too. What if instead of just surviving, you and your team had to work together not only to fend off hordes of monsters, but also achieve other goals as well? And what if instead of fleeing from flesh-eating zombies, for example, you were charging forward into the den of gigantic hostile mutant bugs in the hopes of stealing away some of the precious treasure that they're standing in the way of? And what if instead of 4 hapless suckers, you were a team of roughneck space dwarves? Why not? Deep Rock Galactic sees you as a dwarf employed at probably the greediest corporation in existence, mining for resources and riches on the most overwhelmingly hostile planet in the galaxy. You and your team may all be heavily armed and heavily armored, but the sheer number of hungry monsters will make easy meals of all but the most tightly organized mining teams. It's not only your survival that depends on every member of the team knowing what their role is and pulling their own weight either. You're all dwarves after all, and if there's one thing that dwarves are known for, it's being greedy little treasure hoarders. So if you want to find the biggest hauls and survive long enough to make it back to your spaceship to spend it all, whether it's on the seemingly endless amount of cosmetic stuff that you can get for your dwarves, whether it's costumes, different skins for your weapons, hats, different beards, or if you just want to spend all that at the bar and just get tanked every single time you're in between missions, you got to make sure that your team is tightly put together and you know what you guys are doing. Rock and stone. There you have it. What do you guys think? 10 games from long, long ago, and they're indie alternatives. Tried to go through and I tried to find games that I've been playing, because I play a lot of indie games, that really remind me a lot of games that I played 10, 20, 30 years ago. And I think that that was a good little set right there. And Chibi's already put the song in the video game Discord discussion. Very cool. I love it. So that was my list. Got a little bit of time here left, though. What I can do, though, is I have also prepared a couple of honorable mentions. These are some additional examples of games that I don't think really we need to go very deep into to understand that they were influenced by old games. Like these are, and some of these may not be indies, but some of them are indies, but they're definitely reminiscent of older type games. A good example. I'll give you guys a perfect example. I think most of us have played Octopath Traveler, or at least know what it is, because it is essentially Final Fantasy whatever from the Super Nintendo era, but polished up and turned into a game that we can all play on modern consoles. It's on the Switch right now. It's on Steam. It is definitely a throwback to like the old school SNES era RPGs. In fact, I've played through the entire thing of it, and it is like a long, like 70-hour mashup of like 8 RPGs in one. So if you have any love for the old RPGs of the 16-bit era, definitely check out Octopath Traveler. And a little bit of a tidbit, too. The developers of this are actually tackling another project that's coming out, I think, later this year called Triangle Strategy, where they're doing the same kind of treatment, but instead of tackling old party-based, turn-based RPGs, this one's taking more of an approach of something like Final Fantasy Tactics or Tactics Ogres, so more grid-based, tactics-based, but it's still rocking that pixel art, but in 3D thing that I think that one Dragon Warrior remake game that's coming out soon is also rocking a little bit of. So check that out too. Another game that I think a lot of us know about, a lot of us play a lot of, that is undoubtedly a polished up version of a game that we played back when we were a lot younger. Some of us played because it was a little bit more niche back then, but everybody's beloved Stardew Valley, which if you played any of those old simulation games back on the Super Nintendo, in particular Harvest Moon, it's really no comparing. Like, you can't really argue that it's a modern repolishing up of that. Yes, Rin, sell all the beer. Yep, it's the quintessential farming simulator. It was built off of a lot of those old farming simulators. Not a lot of them made it over to the West and everything, but we did get a couple of the Harvest Moon entries during the day. So, yeah, not much needs to be said about that. Those interested also, the developer of Stardew Valley, who, it's just one developer, by the way, who has put a lot of love into it, does also have a new project coming out, I think later this year, possibly next year. It's called The Haunted Chocolatier. Same sort of pixel art presentation. Less of a farming simulator, more of a shop simulator. I don't know exactly that much about it, but one to keep an eye out for those of you who have played 500 hours of Stardew Valley like some of us have and are maybe looking for something a little fresh to jump into. Of course, if we're talking about like old school games, or like indie games rather, that remind us of old school games, I don't think that I could get away with without mentioning everybody's favorite little indie darling from 5 or 6 years ago, Undertale. Which, if you played any of the old Super Nintendo RPGs back in the day, this one I'll also remember you. But it was less those Japanese hardcore RPGs like the Final Fantasies or the Dragon Warriors. It was more the quirky stuff like Earthbound, for example. Yeah, what more needs to be said about Undertale, and indeed, Deltarune, which is pretty much just the spiritual the sequel to Undertale. But I thought I'd mention that just to get it out there, and also for the pops in the chat, because I like seeing that. Undertale is how I met my bestie and writing partner. That's awesome. That is amazing. And if we're talking about old school games that inform new indie games, the last one that I wanted to mention, I had to squeak this one in because it's so dear to me, is my beloved Shovel Knight. Because Shovel Knight draws from every old school 2D platforming game that was on the old 16-bit and 8-bit consoles when we were kids. Like every Mario game, every Mega Man game, every Castlevania game, DuckTales, the game, all of that is captured perfectly in Shovel Knight. You can't tell, I really love Shovel Knight. And if you haven't tried it yet, but you have fondness for those old games, it's worth a look, because they take all those old conventions, all those old platforming conventions, all the music, all the crunchy sprites and everything, and they polish it all up. They make it 1080p and fantastic. And a lot of content plugged into this one. And much like the previous games I just mentioned, the developer of this also has another project coming out. I think the Kickstarter for this just launched last month. Yacht Club Studios is the developer. They've got another project coming out called Mina the Hollower, which, if you haven't seen the trailers for this, one quick look at the trailers to this and you will agree with me. It is basically just Castlevania Link's Awakening. It's presented with old Game Boy Color graphics, and it stars a character with a Castlevania-style whip. That's the nostalgia that we're all looking for, right? That's indie games being informed by old-school game design from our nostalgic years. Those were my honorable mentions that I thought I'd mention. And hopefully everybody got a chance to have some good fond nostalgia from that list. Maybe pick out a game or two from that list that maybe you'll want to go and check out once the panel is over, hopefully. If you want to dive a little bit more into discussions about any of those, if you want to share links or trailers or Kickstarter links or anything like that, jump into the video game discussion channel on the Kanji Discord. I'm going to keep my eye on that throughout the entire weekend. I love talking indie games or whatever, and I love discovering new games. And I hope everybody got a chance to discover some new games from that list. But that's going to wrap up my time with you guys here. Thank you, everybody, for joining me here for There's an Indie Game for That. Special thanks and kudos, of course, to the kanji developer, or the kanji developers, kanji runners. They developed it, I guess. That's a way to put it. For giving me the opportunity to sort of take the wheel here and go on a journey with you guys and talk about video games, which is my favorite thing to talk about. And up next, I believe I'm gonna give the keys back to the runners, and they're gonna get set up for the next panel. I believe we're gonna be talking about shows that we watched during the lockdown. So I'm going to sign off, everybody. You might see me pop up again somewhere along the line throughout the weekend. If not, definitely, like I said, find me in the Discord somewhere. I'm posting all over in that place. And everybody, enjoy the rest of Kanji. Stay warm. And have a good time, everyone. Take care.